Hi, this is Ed Driscoll. Welcome to Silicon Graffiti. The weekend before November's elections, Frank Rich of the New York Times wrote a curious column titled, "The G.O.P. Stalinists Invade Upstate New York." Apparently, in Rich's mind, because conservatives thought, accurately as it turned out, that Dede Scozzafava, running for Congress in New York's 23rd District, was a Republican in name only, and they preferred a more conservative candidate, that made them Stalinists. On the other hand, it was rather refreshing to see a journalist with the New York Times use the word pejoratively. This hasn't always been the case. In September, Thomas Friedman, another prominent Timesman, expressed his love for totalitarian China over American democracy. Quote, "One-party autocracy certainly has its drawbacks, but when it is led by a reasonably enlightened group of people, as China is today, it can also have great advantages. That one party can just impose politically difficult but critically important policies needed to move a society forward in the 21st century." Close quote. As Mao famously wrote, power flows from the barrel of a gun. And that's just the way Friedman likes it, judging by a column that he wrote in 2000 with this rather astonishing opening sentence. Quote, "Yup, I gotta confess, that now famous picture of a U.S. Marshal in Miami pointing an automatic weapon towards Donato Dalrymple and ordering him in the name of the U.S. government to turn over Elian Gonzalez warmed my heart." Close quote. And I'll bet it did. When Joseph Stalin died in 1953, the Times obit was the closest an American newspaper ever came to public necrophilia. It mentioned nothing about the show trials, the gulags, and the millions killed by Stalin. Instead, readers were greeted with the headline, quote, "Stalin rose from Czarist oppression to transform Russia into a mighty socialist state." Of course, there were a few potholes along the way to the Times' imagined socialist nirvana, and in the early 1930s, Walter Duranty of the New York Times expressed his love for Big Brother by looking away at Stalin's attempts to use starvation as a weapon against the Ukrainian peasants. Or as Pajamas Media CEO Roger L. Simon mentioned earlier this year,
the misreporting of Joseph Stalin's forced starvation of millions of Ukrainian peasants by the NYT's Moscow correspondent Walter Duranty. Some say that policy of Stalin's was equal in horror and death to the Holocaust itself. And yet Duranty papered it over in the Times, reporting after a visit to the area that while there were some scattered shortages, a true famine, forced or otherwise, did not exist. After all, as Duranty so often explained, you had to break a few eggs to make an omelet.
Flash forward to the Vietnam War. According to the New Yorker magazine, the following conversation took place in the early 1970s between the late Punch Salzberger, then the New York Times publisher, and his son Pinch, who eventually succeeded him as the head Timesman, but not before being arrested at least twice for civil disobedience in the wake of the Vietnam War. As the New Yorker reported, quote, "Over dinner, he asked his son why he was involved with the protests and what kind of behavior the family might expect of him in the future. Arthur assured his father that he was not planning on a career of getting himself arrested. After dinner, as the two men walked in the Boston Common, Punch asked what his son later described as the dumbest question I've ever heard in my life. If a young American soldier came upon a young North Vietnamese soldier, which one do you want to see get shot? Arthur answered, I would want to see the American get shot. It's the other guy's country. We shouldn't be there." To the elder Salzberger, this bordered on traitor's talk. "How can you say that?" he yelled. Years later, Arthur said of the incident, "It's the closest he ever came to hitting me." Close quote. In 2004, Daniel Ockran, hired as the Times' first ombudsman in the wake of the Jason Blair scandal, wrote, "Is the New York Times a liberal newspaper?" Of course it is. Fair enough. But the style of liberalism that the Gray Lady has displayed through the decades doesn't sound to me to be a form that Harry Truman, JFK, or LBJ would grant their blessings. For Silicon Graffiti, I'm Ed Driscoll.